On May 30th, 2005, 124 students and 7 chaperones from Mountain Brook High School in Birmingham, Alabama were set to return home from a graduation trip to the island of Aruba, formerly known as Netherlands Antilles. Half of the students were booked for an early flight, and the other half, including a young woman named Natalee Holloway, were booked for a 3 p.m. flight back to the United States. The students in the second group were supposed to be packed up and in the hotel lobby at 10 a.m. to catch a bus to the Queen Beatrix International Airport. When Natalee's hotel roommate and good friend Ruth McVeigh woke up and didn't see her, she assumed her friend had stayed in a different room. The students had taken full advantage of the island nightlife, and Ruth thought it likely that Natalee didn't want to wake her when she came in late. It wasn't uncommon for students to crash in whichever room they ended up in at the end of the evening, but by the time it was nearing 10 o'clock and Natalee was nowhere to be found, she started to panic. Ruth had been asking other friends if they had seen Natalee, but none of them had. When it was clear that Natalee hadn't returned to the hotel the night before, Ruth notified the teachers that were chaperoning the trip. The teachers rounded up the other students and asked when the last time they had seen Natalee was. One of the students said he had seen her the previous night in a silver car with some guys. Another student said they also saw Natalee in the back seat with a tall white guy. The Americans reported the missing young woman to hotel security, and then the chaperones told Natalee's friends they needed to get on the bus to the airport. They didn't want to leave without Natalee, but one of the chaperones, Paul Lilly, offered to stay behind and wait for the missing girl. Natalee's luggage and passport were still at the hotel, so she would definitely have to return there before trying to go home. Ruth and the other girls reluctantly got on the bus and left Natalee behind. Little did they know that Natalee Holloway would never leave Aruba. This is Monsters. Joran van der Sloot was born on August 6, 1987 in Arnhem, a city pretty centrally located in the Netherlands. The city was the site of the 9-day Battle of Arnhem in September of 1944. Arnhem took the second largest amount of damage in the Netherlands during the war after Rotterdam. Joran's parents, Paulus and Anita van der Sloot, were a bit untrusting of the government, as they said they weren't married when Joran was born because they didn't think they needed a court document to honor their commitment. That's not all, because Paulus was a lawyer who was set to take a government post when he moved to Arnhem in 1970. He ended up instead joining a private practice representing people who were fighting cases against the government. I believe that Joran has 2 siblings, but that detail is reported differently all over the place. Some have reported him as an only child. Some say he has a brother. Others claim he has 2 half-brothers. Then there are reports that he has a brother and a sister. All of them claim they're different ages. The book Portrait of a Monster by Lisa Pulitzer and Cole Thompson says he has 2 younger brothers. Valentine, born in 1989, and Sebastian, born in 1995. During that time period, Paulus van der Sloot was in the midst of a battle over some property in his hometown. It seemed that the small roads there were not suitable for the increased traffic in the area, and they lacked any sort of sidewalk. The government wanted to take some property, some of which was owned by Paulus and his brother, in order to build a new road. That turned into a 20-year fight to get the government to find another way to solve the problem. During that time, Paulus started looking for a change, and in 1991, he was offered a position as a lawyer for the government in Aruba. Aruba has a large Dutch influence due to the Kingdom of the Netherlands colonizing the island in 1636. By the time the van der Sloots moved there, it had become an autonomous country within the Dutch kingdom, but still had and does have many Dutch nationals working within its government. Joran loved the island. Unlike the Netherlands, it had endless warm weather and was an exotic place to explore. He eventually grew to feel like an outsider when they would return to the Netherlands every couple of years to visit his family. He learned to speak the local language, Papiamento, fluently. He also learned English by attending the International School of Aruba. His mother, Anita, had been a teacher before the move, and she got a job teaching art at the International School, which lowered the tuition. Like with many expats, people that were not native to the island were treated differently. By learning the native language, Joran was able to fit in better and began making friends with local kids. Joran started to consider himself an island boy and grew to view expats and tourists as beneath him. In 2001, Paulus was offered an opportunity to train to become a judge. The training period would be 3 years where he would have to frequently be away. The position would require him to travel to different islands to handle court-related matters. One of those 3 years he would have to spend training in the Netherlands. He decided the sacrifice was worth it and accepted the position. There were 2 major aspects of Paulus's new job that would greatly affect Joran: the teen's resentment over his father's absences and the power he would have to sweep the trouble he would create under the rug. The Vandersloots were not considered wealthy, but by island standards they were definitely making a good living. They had a live-in nanny when the children were younger who lived in a detached apartment behind the house. As the children grew up and no longer needed the extra attention, the nanny was let go and Joran was allowed to move into the apartment. That gave him more personal freedom than he should have had, but his parents were desperate to shield their younger children from his increasingly erratic behavior. As Joran got older, he became a prolific liar and would regularly snap at his family. He was aggressive, argumentative, and his large stature made his brothers fear him. Having him separated from the family seemed like a relatively simple decision, but Paulus and Anita didn't realize that they had just given the young man the freedom to switch that aggressive personality away from the family and just put other people in danger. By then, Joran had developed an addiction to gambling. Obviously, at 17 years old, he should have been too young to gamble, but casinos on the island weren't known to be too strict with who was in the casino. Also, Paulus had a prominent position on the island, so when he brought his underage son with him to the tables in the years prior, nobody questioned him. By his later teen years, Joran was stealing from people in order to feed his habit, and when caught, he would lie. Then when he was caught in the lie, he would lie about the lie. He was on a downward spiral and had no qualms about digging a deeper hole to try and escape consequences. The other problem with him being in the casinos was that they usually offered free cocktails, so Joran was doing a whole lot of drinking at a young age. Another addiction of Joran's was girls. He had hit puberty at a young age, which might explain why he was so much bigger than his peers. By 17, he was 6'4" or 193 centimeters and muscular. He and his group of islander friends called themselves the Pimpology Crew, and they focused their attention on picking up tourists, most of whom were American. Joran would say that he found American girls to be the loosest. His words, not mine. He felt that Americans tended to overindulge in alcohol and would lose their inhibitions easier, so they were who he tended to target more. One of Joran's favorite places to gamble was the Excelsior Casino inside the Holiday Inn. It was a mid-level hotel that was right on the beach. Not fancy, but affordable with an all-inclusive package that allowed tourists to sleep, eat, and drink during their stay at one set price. Joran had spent over a year playing poker, learning the game, studying players, and trying to build up enough skill to become a professional. Local players would communicate in Papiamento, and since Joran was fluent in the language, he was able to get more insight into the game than most tourists. On May 29, 2005, Joran had been at the Excelsior since 4 p.m. with his father. The two were playing in a free Texas Hold'em tournament. Paulus preferred to play Baccarat, but Joran enjoyed poker so much that he had taught his father and now they were competing together. While most gambling tournaments require a buy-in, this particular event was free. The participants were given $500 worth of chips to use in the game, and the winner could receive a preset prize. At 6 o'clock, Joran folded his last hand and was out of the tournament. Eventually, Paulus had to go home and care for the other two boys since Anita was out of town and Joran took over his spot at the poker table. Paulus told his son to call him when he was done and he would come pick him up. After about 30 minutes, Joran was out of chips again and headed to the blackjack tables. After a few minutes there, a group of 4 young women sat down at the same table. Two blondes and two brunettes from Mountain Brook High School introduced themselves: Ruth McVeigh, Lee Broughton, Madison Watley, and Natalee Holloway. Natalee Holloway was born on October 21, 1986 in Memphis, Tennessee. She had a younger brother named Matthew. Her parents, Dave and Beth Holloway, had been college sweethearts who earned bachelor's degrees before moving to Memphis and getting married. In 1989, the family moved to Clinton, Mississippi, a much quieter place than Memphis, and it was a rough transition. The once happy couple realized that their relationship wasn't working, and Dave and Beth divorced in 1993. In 2000, Beth remarried a man named George Twitty, who went by Jug. Jug was a successful businessman in Alabama, and after the wedding, Beth and her two children moved into his home in the upscale area of Mountain Brook. By the time Natalee was a senior in high school, she was up to her neck in activities. She was a good student who was on the dance team, a peer counselor, and a member of the National Honor Society. She had a part-time job at a health food store and also kept busy with activities at her church. Then she planned on going to Aruba with her graduating class to celebrate the end of her high school career. She had received a full-ride scholarship to the University of Alabama, where she planned to study pre-med. On May 26th, Natalee, her classmates, and the chaperones caught a flight to Aruba and began their 5-day celebration. Despite there being 7 chaperones, the students were pretty much left to do as they pleased on the island. The drinking age in Aruba was only 18 and again, not strictly enforced, so the teens were able to do some pretty heavy partying. Like other tourist locations, in Aruba you could buy drinks by the yard, where they were literally served in a plastic cup that was a yard long. The tourists had grown fond of a local club called Carlos and Charlie's. The club was right on the docks and catered to tourists who were just stepping off the cruise ships, ready to get wild in the holiday paradise. Though they were only there for less than a week, the DJ at the club learned where the teens were from and would play Sweet Home Alabama whenever they walked in. Natalee and her friends had developed a routine of waking up, having a morning cocktail, then spending the morning on the beach. Then after lunch, they would take a nap in their room before getting ready for a night at the clubs. On their last night at the island, Ruth wanted to hit a casino to try to win back some of the money she had lost during the previous days. The 4 girls went to the Excelsior and sat down at a blackjack table next to Joran Sloot. It only took Ruth a few minutes to lose even more money, so she asked Joran if he would help her win her money back. While he assisted Ruth, telling her when to hit and when to stand, he got to know more about the young women. He learned that they were tourists on a class trip, celebrating their high school graduation. Joran told them about himself, but unlike the 4 girls, nothing he told them was the truth. He and his friends had learned long ago that the tourists to the island were generally distrusting of the locals. Travelers all over the world are warned against locals who are just looking to take advantage of people who have little knowledge of the area. That was nothing new, and Joran knew that tourists would trust him more if they thought he was also a tourist. Unlike his friends who were local islanders, he was Dutch, spoke fluent English, and could easily pass for a foreigner who was also on vacation. Joran told the girls that he was a tourist visiting from the Netherlands. He told them that, like them, he was staying at the Holiday Inn. He also told them that he was 19 years old. Joran was able to help Ruth win back about $100, and it was then that he encouraged her to walk away. Ironically, though his advice had helped Ruth, Joran himself was down about $250. As the gambling came to an end, the friends told Joran that they were going to Carlos and Charlie's, and they encouraged him to meet them there. He told them that he would try to make it, acting nonchalant, but he knew he would go. He had already prepped the girls with his fictitious backstory, and he wasn't about to miss out on the opportunity to get lucky. At 10 p.m., Joran walked to a nearby McDonald's where he called his father to pick him up. Once home, in the privacy of his separate apartment, Joran started calling around to find a ride to Carlos and Charlie's. His friend Deepak had just gotten off work, and his interest was piqued when Joran told him about the 4 teenage girls he had just met at the casino. Deepak arrived with his younger brother Satish. The 3 got into Deepak's tricked-out Honda Civic, and they headed towards the nightclub. The 3 young men got to Carlos and Charlie's at about midnight. It was Sunday night, so the club would close at 1 a.m., but that was more than enough time for Joran to weasel his way into one of the tourists' panties. The music was blaring, and Joran and his friends ordered some drinks before Joran spotted Natalee on the dance floor. Natalee was on the dance team at school, so her moves on the dance floor stood out to most men. At 5 foot 4 inches or 162.5 centimeters with long blonde hair, she was dressed in a short denim skirt and a halter top that looked like a bandana. Despite it being an hour before closing, she didn't look like she was slowing down at all. There were around 30 of the traveling students at the club that night, but Natalee was specifically there with the other 3 girls from her hotel room. Sometime after midnight, Ruth and Madison decided to call it a night. They had to get up and get ready to head home in the morning. When Ruth waved to Natalee to let her know she was leaving, she said her friend was at the bar with Joran. That would be the last time Ruth ever saw Natalee. When Ruth woke up the next morning, Natalee wasn't in the room, but the last friend that was with her at the club, Lee, was there asleep in the other double bed. When Ruth asked her where Natalee was, Lee said she didn't know. That's when the young women decided that Natalee must have crashed in a different room, but that theory was short-lived. When the Americans reported Natalee missing to the hotel security, they didn't seem too concerned. They were likely used to young people partying too hard and missing their rides to the airport, and this probably didn't seem any different to them. But after enough time passed and Natalee never surfaced, the chaperone who had stayed behind, Paul Lilly, contacted Natalee's mother. Beth Twitty was also on vacation when she received the call. She had taken the opportunity while her daughter was away to spend some time relaxing at a lake house in Arkansas with a couple of friends. The 3 women were on their way back home when Beth got the notification that Natalee was missing. She immediately called her husband Jug and had him arrange a charter flight to Aruba. The Twittys were doing well financially and had the resources to become immediately involved in the search for Natalee. By the time they arrived in Aruba, they had learned that Natalee had last been seen at Carlos and Charlie's, where she left with a group of young men in a silver Honda Civic. That same day at about 10 p.m., the private jet arrived in Aruba with Beth, Jug, and a few other parents of students that had been on the trip. A private escort had been arranged for the group and they immediately went to the Holiday Inn. While they were on the island, Beth stayed in the same room that Natalee and her friends had stayed in, room 7114. The authorities in Aruba were not as organized as they were in the U.S. Even in the U.S., sometimes reporting a missing teen was met with resistance, and in Aruba, it was even more difficult. Most security guards and even police officers weren't sure what to do or who to report to. It wasn't until the group had a chance encounter with a man named Eric Williams that they finally started getting some results. Eric was a DEA agent who just happened to be on vacation at the time. He was able to use some of his connections to move the investigation along. At the same time, Beth approached the hotel reception and asked if they knew a guest named Joran. Of course, the lady at reception knew him. She told Beth that Joran was a regular at the casino upstairs and that he wasn't a guest. He was a local who liked to pick up tourist girls. That information alarmed Beth because that meant that everything Joran had told the other students he had talked to were lies. The good news was that, as a local, he likely hadn't left the island. The next thing they wanted to do was to look at surveillance footage from the casino to get a picture of Joran. Despite her daughter being missing for almost 24 hours, the hotel told them that they would have to wait until the morning to look at the footage. It was another case of the locals having no concern that a teenage girl was missing. While they waited for the casino's security office to open, they drove into town and went to Carlos and Charlie's, but they didn't receive any new leads. Their only chance at getting new information was to see the surveillance tapes from the casino, so the group went back to the hotel and demanded to see them immediately. Beth said she would stay right there until someone showed them the recordings, and it worked. Finally, a manager escorted them to the casino's security office where they were able to review the footage from the previous day. It was there that they saw Joran wearing a blue and white striped polo shirt sitting at a blackjack table when 4 young women approached him. One of them was Natalee. With a picture of Joran in hand, the group began questioning locals until they got Joran's full name and address. A couple of security guards for the group drove past the house and saw a silver Honda parked in the area. When they relayed the information to the Americans, they were sure they were on the right track. The group of Americans went straight to the closest police station where they turned over all the information they had uncovered. Not surprisingly, the authorities were resistant to act, but Beth's persistence was strong enough here to get the police to agree to accompany them to the Sloot home. By the time they got there, the Honda was gone. When Paulus went to the front gate to talk to the large group of people at about 2 a.m., he explained that Joran couldn't have been the last person to see Natalee because he had picked his son up at the McDonald's at about 10:15 that evening and Joran was home all night after that. Or so he believed. It was a sign of just how much the Sloots didn't know about their son's mischievous behavior. That was reinforced when Paulus, who was sure his son was home then, went to the detached apartment and found it empty. When he called his son's cell phone, it turned out that Joran was at the Windham Aruba Resort Spa and Casino, participating in a free Texas Hold'em tournament. Paulus told his son to stay there and the entire group went to the hotel to talk to the teen. Of course, by the time they arrived, Joran had left, claiming he had misunderstood the instructions given to him by his father. Sure. The truth was that he was just buying himself time. Time to get his story straight before being questioned by the group of panicked parents. Back at the Sloot residence, Joran and Deepak were outside of the house, sitting on the hood of the car when the group returned. Paulus was upset about how little concern his son had about the situation. Joran smugly claimed that he didn't know the girl in question, but when he was shown a picture of Natalee, he relented that he had met her. His story, which was backed up by Deepak, was that Natalee was drunk and didn't want to go home when Carlos and Charlie's closed. He asked if they could go back to her hotel room, but she said she wanted to see his house. He claimed that he agreed to take her back to his house, which would have been strange since he had told the students that he was a tourist from the Netherlands. In his story to the group, he claimed that he eventually told her they couldn't go to his house and she asked to go to the California Lighthouse, a popular tourist destination. She said she wanted to see sharks, and despite Joran telling her that there were no sharks there, she insisted. So that's where they went. On the way, he claimed to have touched her breasts and vagina in the back seat. He said they only drove by the lighthouse and then they dropped her off at the hotel at about 2 a.m. Joran went on to tell the group that Natalee had fallen and hit her head, but she refused any treatment. As they were driving away from the Holiday Inn, they saw a dark male who looked like a security guard approaching Natalee. According to him, that was the last time they saw her. The Americans didn't believe Joran's story and made that very clear, but Paulus believed his son. Of course he did. Joran's parents seemed very naive about their son's personal actions. It wasn't long before Paulus's law experience kicked in and he told the Americans that they had no jurisdiction there. As the Sloots began backing off from questioning, investigators in Aruba were finally starting to take the disappearance seriously. They would later question Deepak and Satish Kalpo about what happened in the early morning hours of May 30th. Their story was that Natalee was extremely drunk and that she approached Joran at the club. The two danced for a while, and when they left the club, Deepak claimed he was hesitant about her coming with them, but he made sure the investigators knew that Natalee had insisted. Right. They confirmed Joran's version of events as they drove to the lighthouse and back before leaving her at the Holiday Inn. When Joran was questioned again, he claimed that he watched Natalee walk from the car to the entrance of the hotel and that he could see that the lobby was empty. That didn't line up with the fact that Natalee's friend Ali said she was in the lobby until 3 a.m. and never saw Natalee come into the hotel. It also differed from Deepak and Satish's statements that they saw a dark-skinned man in the hotel lobby, someone who Lee said was not there. The entire investigation was a mess. The police made some arrests based on the statements of Joran and the Kalpo brothers, but since their statements were full of lies, that didn't get them any closer to finding Natalee. The group of Americans were offering money to people with information, so drug addicts were basically making up information in order to get paid. Natalee's family were knocking on doors of local drug dealers who had nothing to do with the case. Eventually, Beth got frustrated with the lackluster involvement by the local authorities and went on the news to talk about the case.
And that is a question that is going to have to be answered. They know what, they know who, they know where, they know when, they know how, and they know why. They know every answer to the questions. Why am I not getting it? Why are they not getting it? I do not know. But I need answers, and I need them now.
Once the media grabbed the story and blew it up, the search for Natalee picked up. The Royal Dutch Marines got involved, along with 10 FBI agents, and hundreds of locals and tourists started combing the beaches for clues. Eventually, authorities found a surveillance video from outside of the hotel's lobby, and there was no sign of Natalee or the 3 young men in the silver Honda at the time they claimed they had dropped Natalee off. Joran and the Kalpoe brothers had gone to the Holiday Inn and pointed out exactly where they had dropped Natalee off, and it was definitely where the camera would have picked them up. On June 9, 2005, Joran, Deepak, and Satish were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and murdering Natalee, but the Aruban authorities jumped the gun on the arrest. They were allowed to arrest the young men on suspicion, but they would eventually need to provide evidence of their guilt, which they didn't have. They would later claim that they made the arrest due to pressure from Natalee's family. Coincidentally, Deepak was being held in a jail cell right next to one of the security guards that had been arrested due to his lies. Without knowing who his jail neighbor was, Deepak confessed that he hadn't dropped Natalee off at the Holiday Inn, and they lied about seeing her with the security guard. Because of that, the scapegoat was freed, and the authorities had more questions for Joran and his friends. Of course, that's when their story changed, and they claimed that Deepak and Satish had dropped Joran and Natalee off at the beach by the Marriott before going home. Now, Joran claimed that he and Natalee went into the water before she passed out on the beach. He left her there sleeping and walked home. How gentlemanly. Joran told investigators that he had told Deepak that he left Natalee on the beach while he was walking home and that his friend probably went there, sexually assaulted, and killed the tourist. Despite the news story sounding like complete bullshit, there was no evidence that any of the 3 had harmed Natalee. On July 4th, the Kalpoe brothers were released and Joran was released 60 days later. 4 days after being released, Joran and his father returned to the Netherlands in an attempt to get away from the attention in Aruba. From there, the story hung in the news with various developments. There were more arrests based on claims by Joran and the Kalpoe brothers of people not involved in Natalee's disappearance. All 3 young men were rearrested in 2007, Joran in the Netherlands and the brothers in Aruba, but were released again for lack of evidence. Authorities didn't even have confirmation that Natalee was dead, so prosecuting anybody they believed was involved was nearly impossible. Joran wasn't the type of person to keep quiet about his actions, though. He flew to New York in 2006 to do a television interview, and while there, was served with papers because Beth Twitty and Dave Holloway had filed a civil suit against both Joran and Paulus. In 2007, Joran published an autobiography, unsurprisingly filled with lies. After being released by the authorities in 2007, Joran moved to Thailand where he enrolled in ranks at university. Unlike the Netherlands, Joran was able to remain relatively anonymous in Thailand. While living there, Joran told an American reporter that he hadn't hurt Natalee, but that he had actually sold her to sex traffickers for $10,000. He met with the reporter in Thailand and sold the story and evidence that it was true for $25,000, but it was all bullshit. He did the interview, handed over tapes that were supposedly recordings and a supposed receipt for a wire transfer for $10,000 from the traffickers. But once the interview was over and the reporter was back at the airport, he sent them a message saying it was all lies. He just needed the money. That would eventually become a repeated issue for Joran. He started using fake versions of Natalee's disappearance as a means of making money. After giving the American reporter the fake sex trafficking story, a Dutch reporter made claims that the young man was a scout for sex traffickers, and people in the community around the university in Thailand started protesting his presence. The university kicked him out in May of 2009. Joran tried to remain in Thailand using the money he had scammed from reporters to open a coffee shop, but his gambling addiction had taken over, and by February of 2010, he was broke and got evicted from his apartment. At the same time, Paulus had a heart attack and died while playing tennis in Aruba. Joran was broke and alone. His mother still communicated with him, but his father was dead and his brothers were keeping their distance. Joran ended up selling his coffee shop and moved back into the apartment behind his mother's house in Aruba. In March of 2010, Joran contacted Natalee's family and said he would reveal the location of her body and the details of her death for $250,000. The FBI was notified and they brokered a deal to pay Joran $25,000 up front for the location of Natalee's body. Once her remains were recovered, they would pay the remaining $225,000 for the story. Joran was great at weaseling deposits out of people but never delivering on the promise. Beth wired $10,000 to Joran's account and a representative met with the young man in Aruba almost a month later where he got the rest of the deposit, $10,000 in cash and another $5,000 wired. He then told the representative that Natalee had fallen and hit her head on a rock, so he and his father buried her body under a house that was under construction at the time. Joran likely believed that he had bought himself time as investigators would have to pull up concrete and dig before realizing that he had lied, but a simple search of building permits showed that the house wasn't under construction when Joran said it was. Despite the FBI having recorded the extortion and confession, they didn't immediately arrest Joran as they were hoping he would still lead them to Natalee's body. That delay allowed Joran to escape as he most likely never expected to get a full $250,000. He just wanted the $25,000 to fund his escape, which he did. The next time Joran would be seen would be in Peru, not surprisingly at a casino. Stephanie Flores Ramirez was born on July 22, 1988, the only daughter of Ricardo Flores and Mary Elena Ramirez. She had 4 brothers. Early on, her family owned a circus and Stephanie had spent her youth with exotic animals and a variety of performers. Ricardo was also a well-known race car driver, which is where Stephanie got her love of cars. Unfortunately, like Joran, Stephanie had also developed a love of gambling. She had had to be bailed out of debt multiple times, once after she had hawked her car. She was working on a business degree at the University of Lima and once asked her father for money to buy a new laptop. He suspected that she had sold her previous one to pay gambling debts. On May 29, 2010, exactly 5 years after Natalee Holloway went missing, Stephanie met up with some friends to hang out at the El Pacifico Hotel in Miraflores. In Peru, many children live at home with their parents until they get married, so they commonly rent cheap hotel rooms to hang out with their friends. Stephanie and her friend, Carola Sanguinetti, planned on spending the evening with another friend, Carolina Gallo, playing video games. On their way to the hotel, they saw a carnival being hosted at a local school and the young women stopped to have some fun. While there, Carola was surprised to see that Stephanie had a large amount of cash on her. It was the equivalent of $1,000 American, and Stephanie claimed that she had won it gambling a few days prior. The truth was it was the money that her father had given her to buy a new laptop. After the carnival, they met Carolina in the lobby of the hotel and spent the next few hours playing video games before parting ways at about 2 a.m. the next morning. When Stephanie dropped off Carola, she told her friend that she was going home and would text her when she got there. A few minutes later, she sent that text, claiming to be home, but she wasn't. She was at the Atlantic City Casino. She had gone straight to the poker suite and eventually took a seat next to a tall young man with dark hair. It was Joran van der Sloot. Joran had been in Lima trying to compete in a poker tournament. People who weren't registered in the tournament could wait on the sidelines and fill in for anyone who was registered who didn't show up. Joran was biding his time when Stephanie sat down next to him that fateful morning. It wasn't the first time Joran and Stephanie played poker together, though. The two had been introduced to each other a few days earlier and had played at the same poker table multiple times since then. The two played until about 5 a.m. before leaving the casino together. That would be the last time Stephanie was seen alive. Joran had come to Peru with $25,000 on May 14th, and in just 2 weeks he was broke. He didn't have the money to pay for his hotel room at the Hotel TAC. It was a budget hotel that allowed people to pay as they went, and by June 1st, Joran was 2 days past due on his bill. When the receptionist went up to the room to try and collect, she got no answer at the door. Her supervisor was adamant about getting paid, so the receptionist grabbed a spare key and let herself into the room. It was there that she found the body of Stephanie Flores Ramirez on the floor next to the bed, covered in blood. Unlike with Natalee Holloway, there was no question about who had killed Stephanie. Joran had not done anything to hide his identity or cover up the crime. He had been seen by multiple witnesses entering the hotel with Stephanie. They were in the room that was in his name, and he had left personal belongings in the room with the body. Stephanie's family noticed that she was missing before her body had been discovered. When Ricardo realized she hadn't returned home the night before, alarm bells went off. She never stayed out all night without letting him know where she would be. When Ricardo called the police, he was told to wait for a ransom. Kidnappings for ransom weren't uncommon in the area, and they usually ended without any harm coming to the kidnappee. Since Ricardo was a well-known race car driver, it wouldn't have been surprising if his family was targeted for ransom. It was common for the kidnappers in these situations to get paid and release the hostage. But as time passed and nobody asked for a ransom, it was clear that something else had happened. It wasn't long before police found Stephanie's vehicle abandoned in one of the more crime-ridden neighborhoods. There were no clues as to where Stephanie had gone in the car, so Ricardo and two of his sons went to the Atlantic City casino to see if they could find any clues there. Ricardo was friends with the casino owner, and after reviewing surveillance footage, they saw Stephanie sit down at the poker table next to an unidentified man. They also saw her leave the casino with him a few hours later. There had been a raffle at the casino that night, and an employee remembered the man signing up. She found the card and revealed that his name was Joran van der Sloot. Ricardo was initially fearful that the young man had also been kidnapped, but once back at home, a family member started searching for Joran's name on the internet to see if there were any missing persons reports. What they found left the entire family shocked. They found news report after news report that told the story of Joran being the main suspect in the case of a young woman having gone missing in Aruba exactly 5 years earlier. Like with Stephanie, Joran had met the missing girl at a casino and she disappeared that night. Ricardo no longer feared for Joran's safety and began believing that he was the one who took Stephanie. He was right to suspect the Dutchman, but he hadn't taken Stephanie, something they would soon find out when they were notified that her body was found in Joran's hotel room. The family was told that Stephanie was found in a room rented by Joran and that he was nowhere to be found. Stephanie was beaten so badly that it was hard to make a positive identification, but one of her brothers was taken to the body and he was able to confirm it was his little sister. In the room, they found a long-sleeved shirt covered in blood. It was the same shirt that Joran had been wearing in the surveillance video at the casino. Stephanie's wallet was on the floor and all the cash was gone. Like every other time Joran ran into trouble, he fled the area. He had left the hotel in Stephanie's vehicle, and after ditching it, how he managed to make it 150 miles or 240 kilometers south to Ica, Peru is unknown. But there he shaved his head and then dyed the stubble strawberry blonde. Then he continued south to Chile, where he contacted an ex-girlfriend and asked her for money to travel back to Aruba. He was eventually picked up by Chilean police, and in his possession was a laptop, charts of ocean currents around Lima, and bloody clothes. He told Chilean police that he was a professional poker player who had met Stephanie at a casino. One evening, they were driving to the casino together when they were pulled over. Two men dressed in police uniforms approached them and demanded all of their money. Joran claimed that he offered the men $1,000, which they laughed at. Then he offered them $4,000 and they accepted. Despite supposedly being headed to the casino when the robbery took place, once the officers left, they grabbed some coffee and went to Joran's hotel room to play poker online. It was there that a man with a knife stepped out of the bathroom and another man with a gun was sitting on the bed. Joran said he thought one of the men might have been one of the officers from the earlier robbery. How they knew where his hotel room was is unknown. The men demanded money and Joran told them that he needed to go to an ATM. He told the Chilean police that he didn't really have to go to an ATM, he had $20,000 in cash on him, which wasn't true. Based on Joran's winnings and losses at the casino, he was almost out of money by then. He alleged that he left the hotel for a few minutes, and when he went back up to his room, one of the men was holding his hand over Stephanie's mouth. His story went on to say that he tried to give the robbers $10,000, but they wanted more, so he told them that he had to go back to an ATM. As he was leaving, the receptionist at the hotel said Stephanie's vehicle needed to be moved, so he went back up to the room to get her keys. But the men were so angry that he was back without money that they told him to grab his things and go back to his country and not tell anyone what had happened. So he quickly grabbed some stuff. Stephanie handed him her keys, and then he went outside and intended to just repark her Jeep, because, that was still important. But he didn't know his way around, so he eventually left it where it had been found. Get the fuck out of here. So he's claiming that he was robbed twice in the same evening. During the second robbery, he told the robbers that he was going to an ATM and returned with $10,000. No ATM will dispense more than a few $100s, usually maxing out at $500 a day. Then when they wanted more, he was going to go out again and get even more money from an ATM, and those robbers didn't think there was anything wrong with that. Then, instead of getting the armed robber's money, he was more concerned about Stephanie's Jeep getting towed. Dude, let the Jeep get towed. Who in their right mind would care about a car getting towed when they're in the middle of being robbed and their friend is being held by two men, one with a knife and one with a gun? Then when he went back up to the room to get her keys, the robbers were so upset that he hadn't gotten them more money that they told him to leave and gave him time to grab his stuff. Then for some reason, after letting Joran go, they killed Stephanie. That is quite possibly the most ridiculous story I've ever heard. The Chilean police had no interest in Joran's line of complete and utter bullshit. They just wanted to get him out of their hair and back to Peru, which they were able to do quickly due to Joran not having entered the country legitimately. Instead of a lengthy extradition process, they just kicked him back to Peru on an immigration violation. Once in custody back in Peru, Joran's story completely fell apart. The evidence collected by the authorities punched a number of holes in Joran's explanation of the crime. There were multiple surveillance videos from the early morning hours of the 30th that showed him leaving the casino with Stephanie and then going into his hotel with Stephanie, and she never returned. There was no point in time where they were driving back to the casino together. Joran was repeatedly interrogated, and on June 7, 2010, he confessed to killing Stephanie. In his full confession, he told investigators that he and Stephanie went to his hotel room to play poker online on his laptop. While they were playing, she saw a message on his screen that was a threat against him from someone regarding the Natalee Holloway case. He said he explained to Stephanie that he had been a suspect in a young woman's disappearance in Aruba, which made her upset. He claimed that she hit him on the side of the head, so he elbowed her in the face. Then he got on top of her and started to strangle her. He initially stopped before she died, but when he looked down and saw blood everywhere, he took off his shirt and smothered her to death with it. Then he grabbed a few things and fled. Of course, that doesn't line up with how beaten Stephanie's body was when she was found. It's likely that Joran was minimizing just how angry he was and how much violence he committed. Joran was charged with first-degree murder and robbery and eventually pleaded guilty to qualified murder and simple robbery. He was sentenced to 28 years behind bars, and after spending 10 years in a Peruvian prison, he ended up having time added to his sentence after he was convicted of smuggling cocaine into the prison. He had 18 additional years added to his sentence. Joran met a Peruvian woman named Lady Figueroa who sold goods inside the prison. The couple got married on July 4, 2014, when Lady was 7 months pregnant with Joran's child. The couple divorced in 2023, and Lady said she was going to change her daughter's last name to cut ties with the convicted murderer. But that isn't the end of the story, because Joran still had crimes to answer for. The Peruvian authorities said that they would extradite Joran to the US to face charges of extortion and wire fraud. While still in prison in Peru, Joran was secretly filmed confessing to killing Natalee and laughing about all the lies he told about it. In an effort to find some justice for Natalee Holloway's family, authorities in Peru extradited Joran to the US on June 8, 2023. He initially pleaded not guilty to the extortion and wire fraud charges, but eventually took a deal where he pleaded guilty to those charges while also confessing to the murder of Natalee.
Plus, she asked to go back to her hotel, but I was just trying to get dropped off a little bit further away from her hotel, so we could walk back to her hotel, and I might still get a chance to be with her.
Okay.
That's what I was hoping for.
Okay. So what happens?
yeah, Deepak drops me off at a place a little right of the Marriott Hotel known as the Fisherman's Huts. This place is not so far from, the next hotel is the Marriott, and the next hotel after that is another Marriott, which is a timeshare, and then it's the Holiday Inn. While we walk along the beach.
Do Deepak and Satish get out? Come with what happens to them?
Deepak and Satish leave. They leave. They go back to their home. I assume they go back to their home. They get in their car and they leave. I'm actually with Natalee walking along the beach. I find a space before we get to the Marriott Hotel, where I lay her down. We lay down together in the sand, and we start kissing each other. I get her to kiss me again. We start kissing each other, and I start feeling her up again. And she tells me no. She tells me she doesn't want me to feel her up. I insist. I keep feeling her up either way. And she knees me. She ends up kneeing me in the crotch. When she knees me in the crotch, I get up on the beach and I kick her extremely hard in the face. She's laying down unconscious, possibly even dead, but definitely unconscious. And I see right next to her there's a huge cinder block laying on the beach.
When you say cinder block, looking at the walls of this place, is it like those?
The exact same cinder blocks. I see a huge cinder block laying on the beach. I take this and I smash her head in with it completely. Her face basically, collapses in. Even though it's dark, I can see her face is collapsed in. Afterwards, I don't exactly know what. I'm scared. I don't know what to do, and I decide to take her and to put her into the ocean. So I grab her and I half pull and half walk with her into the ocean. I push her off. I walk up to about my knees into the ocean, and I push her off into the sea.
Based on Joran's confession, the reason he killed Natalee is likely the same reason he killed Stephanie. She refused his sexual advances, and like a child, he got so angry he bludgeoned her to death. Once Joran confessed to the murder, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the extortion and wire fraud charges. That sentence is set to start after he completes his sentence in Peru. The United States does not have jurisdiction over the murder of Natalee Holloway, and the statute of limitations for murder in Aruba has passed, so it's unlikely that Joran will ever see justice for that crime. At least her family knows the truth, and Joran will still likely spend most of his life in prison. He is scheduled to be released from prison in Peru in 2045, when he'll be 58 years old. Then he'll be transferred to the US, where he'll begin serving his 20-year sentence. And that's if he stays out of trouble while in prison, something he hasn't been able to do so far. It seems that Joran doesn't know how to live a life not being a criminal. If we're lucky, by the time this monster ever gets out of prison, he'll be too old and weak to bludgeon any more young women to death. We can only hope. If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave us a comment. You can check out our other show, Somewhere Sinister, on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.